Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, it's the 2nd of May today and I think the weather conditions are just about okay now for setting out the tomatoes, chilies, peppers and aubergines. So they're all going undercover in the greenhouses and in our new polytunnel. But the nighttime temperatures have been too cold lately to risk putting those in. So we've been following the weather forecast pretty closely for the last couple of weeks, and for a while it looked like we might be able to set them out a little bit earlier, but more cold weather came in. But it looks as though that is finally on its way out, and the nighttime temperatures now I think are going to be okay for planting these. We're going to get those plants in today if possible. We've got quite a bit of work to do in order to get ready for planting because the greenhouses are still chock full of young plants. So we need to clear them out and make space before we can start laying the new plants out. So at the moment we've had all of our tomatoes, peppers and so on in either in propagators where they're crammed in but enjoying reasonable nighttime temperatures, or then some of them have been in this this old box here in the greenhouse, and this is made from twin wall polycarbonate, and that gives these a little bit more protection. So these are the ungrafted tomatoes and then a mixture of various squash plants, and they've been fine in here. We've also covered the top of this with sheets at night, so I think we've had a temperature inside this box of, well, with the sheets and fleece we've used, maybe about 6 degrees above the outside temperature. So that's been perfectly okay for these. The box on its own gives about 4 degrees. With the extra covering, we get about 6 degrees of protection from this. So these plants have been happy in here, but they are quite keen to be moved on. My timings this year were slightly off. Because I haven't grafted my own tomato plants before, I started them pretty early because the grafting process sets the plants back at least 2, if not 3 weeks. So I started that process at the very end of February, and I think I can move that entire schedule by at least 1 week. So the grafted plants, I think they were ready to go about 10 days ago, and they would have been in perfect condition for planting out. Now they are rather bigger than I would like. Those that I didn't graft, of course, well, they're a couple of weeks further ahead still, and well, they are far too big for plants to be just going in the ground, to be honest. They're all in reasonably big pots. I think the smallest pot here would be 1 litre, so I don't think they're suffering too badly from being in the pots. It's just that the plants have got pretty big and they're all fighting for the light because they're crammed into this space. Obviously, I think like every gardener out there, there's a limit to how much space we've got where we can protect these plants from the cold. So our first job is to empty these greenhouses of seedlings and other stuff, and then we can start laying these plants out. So first of all, I'll give you a quick peek at the plants we're going to get in. So these are the ungrafted plants. I mean, they're in flower. Some of them have got a couple of trusses on, but they're all pretty tall now. So I'll need to get these in and tie them up straight away. Well, these are the grafted plants, and these are also in flower. But in order to protect them, they've all been crammed into this space. Again, most of these are in 1 litre pots, so pot size isn't a problem, but they are packed so close together that they have grown vertically rather more than I would like. But on the other hand, they all look like pretty healthy plants, and the greenhouse has a reasonable height to allow these to develop. It's a similar situation with the pepper plants. I did sow these very early this year, and well, some years they're really slow to get going, and other times they really do romp away, and this is one of those times. So I've had 3 layers on the propagator to give it enough height to clear these plants. They've all been potted on into 1 litre pots, but I think these plants really wanted to be out of those maybe a week or two ago, and they're just kind of hanging on. If I don't get them out soon, I think they might start to suffer. I'm hoping they're going to be okay. They look reasonably healthy, quite vigorous plants, but again they are packed into this space to try and fit as many plants into this protected environment as possible. And as you can see here, we've got a bit of rearranging to do. The greenhouses are chock full of young plants that we need to rehome before we can make the space to get the tomatoes in place. So that will be our first job. Well, I'm just cutting up some lengths of jute twine to tie in these tomatoes as I plant them. Right. Well, it's actually taken us quite a long time to clear the greenhouses and take out some weeds and then lay the plants out where we want them. Now, I wasn't sure how many we were going to plant in here. We've got 8 canes running along each side of the polytunnel, but we've also got 2 each side of the doors at the front and the back. So we've actually put 24 tomato plants in here, which is great. We love tomatoes. We're a bit tomato mad. I mean, that was the whole reason for putting up this polytunnel, really. So I wasn't sure whether we were going to fill every position, but we have done. So these plants are looking pretty good. I mean, they're healthy looking plants. They've got their first, and in this one, the second truss of fruit is there. They are a little bit elongated. It's quite a long way up before we get to the first truss on these. I will probably drop these a little bit because these aren't grafted, so I can sink these a little bit deeper. I might pop this leaf off and drop this stem down a little bit. But this is a consequence of being jammed together in the box there where we were protecting them from the cold weather. So that's something I'm going to have to think about for next year, because on the one hand, I'm pretty happy with these plants. They look great. They're good and healthy, and I'm sure they've got decent roots on them. But on the other hand, they are rather longer than I would like. So I might have to think about how we can protect these plants better next year. They're not all quite as tall as that. Some of them are a little bit stockier. This is a Pierre, and that's a slightly stockier variety. This one is also grafted very well, so the grafted versions of Pierre are better plants than some of the others. So it's the 2 large greenhouses that are going to get the grafted plants, or most of the grafted plants. We're spacing them 50 centimetres apart down the length. I suppose we could make that a little bit smaller. I was thinking of maybe 40 centimetres, but if you give them plenty of room, the airflow is going to be better and they're going to be healthier plants. So I don't want to crowd these too much. So I think 50 centimetres down the length is pretty good. Now, in the other large greenhouse, we have an apricot tree on the end wall, so we're not putting any tomatoes there. But we don't have anything growing in this one, so I think we'll put 4 tomatoes here, 2 on each side, and in the centre here, I've left a space, and I think we'll get a couple of greenhouse cucumbers going there. They can run straight up this mesh, and undoubtedly they will reach the roof, in which case they can start to run along the ridge. Now, I'm putting 2 cucumbers here, not because we really need 2 plants, because once they get going they are pretty prolific, but because it's always a good idea, I think, with cucumbers to have a spare in case something happens to one of them. They are pretty prone to all sorts of problems, and particularly to rots at the base of the stem. That's a common way to lose a cucumber. So if one of them doesn't thrive, I can remove it and still have another plant going. So that's what that space is for. So in total we've got 16 grafted plants in this greenhouse and 12 in the other. So you can see that these plants are a little bit longer than is ideal. Now, unlike the ungrafted plants, I can't sink most of these any deeper. So the graft union here is already just about 2 inches above the soil level. So I will have to plant this one at the same level it is at the moment. There are 1 or 2 which have been grafted a little bit higher up, and I can sink them down another inch or 2, but for the most part they're going to have to go in as they are. Although these plants are a little bit leggy, it's not really a problem in these greenhouses because we've got this mesh trellising on the wall, but we've also got it on the roof, so we can run these straight up to the eaves and then carry on up towards the ridge. So we're not sure how vigorous these plants will be. Obviously it's on a vigorous rootstock, but it's a generative sort of rootstock that should put more of its energy into the fruit than into producing vegetation. But we'll have to see just how vigorous these plants turn out to be as we go through the season. But there's no problem here in running the plants right the way up to the ridge if we have to. So with these ungrafted plants, I can set these a little bit deeper. I'm just going to nip off those leaves. We don't really want any leaves too close to the ground anyway. They get splashed from the soil, and that's not a good thing. I think I'll take that one off at the back. And then I can set this a little bit deeper in the hole there. I'm not going to go too mad with it, but it would be nice to get that a few inches lower down. Have a look. No, I can go a little bit further than that, I think. And that's probably enough. So there's a really strong root system on this plant already. It's winding around the top of the pot a bit, but it's not too bad. And I think that leaf at the back can come off as well, because that is on the soil and that's never a good thing. Right, so that looks quite reasonable there. So that should now root all the way up the buried portion of the stem, and that's going to create a really good sized root system. The soil in this bed, unlike other parts of the garden, is nice and loose, so those roots can really get into this stuff, and there's been plenty of organic matter on here, so they should be quite happy in here. So these grafted plants also have a rather nice root ball on them. They're not too pot bound, but probably quite happy to be moving on. So I'm just going to tie that loosely in place. I'm leaving plenty of room on these ties for the stems to expand. These can get pretty big down here. And not setting that too deep. So I've set that one with the graft a couple of inches above the soil level. That one is Rosa di Sorrento. That's one of the new ones for us this year, and I'll be very interested to see how that does. Now, we've also got the same varieties, or most of the same varieties, I think, planted in the polytunnel, ungrafted ones. So we'll be able to compare how they perform. Now, I'm pretty sure that if I put one of the ungrafted ones alongside a grafted plant here, that the grafted plant will do better, simply because we've been growing tomatoes in this soil for quite a long time, and I think that disease resistance is going to give these an advantage. Now, the environment in the polytunnel is obviously different from in here. It's got a diffuse cover. The temperature will probably be a little bit lower. It doesn't have the benefit of a wall, and so on. The ventilation is different, but even so, I think it will be a reasonably informative comparison. Now, the soil in these beds is lovely. It's deep and really well conditioned. It gets a little bit compact along the front edge where we're walking on it all the time, but back here where we're planting the tomatoes, it's a really good deep soil. That's an old apricot pit that is germinated, or a peach pit maybe. Don't need that in there. And now I'm moving on to the aubergines. Now, we don't grow too many aubergines because my wife doesn't really like them, and I like them, but we don't need too many plants to keep me happy. So I've actually got 3 varieties here. I only planned on growing 2, but now I couldn't resist the 3rd packet of seed. This one is a new one to us. This is Turkish orange. It looks like it's going to be happy to get out of this pot. I really don't know about the growth habit of this one. It looks like it's going to be a little bit on the bushy side. I understand that the fruit aren't too big. These others, I've got Rosa sfumata, that simply means pink tinged, and what have I got here? Violetta di Firenze. So these are both purple pink varieties, and these will grow with quite tall stems, but this one I think is going to end up a little bit bushy. So I'm not going to let all of these stems grow. I haven't quite decided yet, but I will keep either 1 or 2 main stems and pinch everything else out. I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to support them either, but that's a job for another day. They don't need support quite yet, so I think that's going to be fine. I've got 3 on each side of the path here, exactly the same, so 2 plants of each. And there's nothing special with planting these. They're going in the same depth more or less as they were in the pot. I'm just going to pinch off some of the leaves and growth from around the base of the stem. I don't think that's particularly helpful down there. Those are not likely to thrive. And later on I will probably pinch off these big old leaves because they're going to drag on the ground, and that's not healthy either. But I'll let the plant develop a little bit before I nip those out. Well, since we covered the tunnel, the soil has had a chance to dry out here, but I'll give these a good water after I've planted them in, and then these soaker hoses are now on the timer, so they should get some water down to these in due course. And again, I'll pinch off those lower leaves. Well, these plants aren't bad. They're in the right sort of state for going out, not pot bound. When I'm training these, if I am going to keep two stems, I will want them in this plane. So I'm just taking note of that when I orient this, because this one is already split into two stems. The other two, well, they're still single stems, but I just want to make sure that they're lined up correctly. I'll just give them a good soak. Well, these look like they might benefit from a drop of feed actually, but they are getting their feet into some richer soil now, so I don't know. I'll see how they do over the next few days and maybe give them a drop of feed. I think maybe just a balanced feed to start with. Later in the year it could be a higher in potash, but I think a balanced feed at this stage might be okay. But that's it for the aubergines. In the larger greenhouses, I've got 10 peppers going into each, 9 down the side and then 1 round the end of the bed there. So I've got 4 different types of pepper. I've got 10 yellow going in here, 10 red in the other greenhouse. 5 of these are the Asti pepper, the Quadrato d'Asti. That's a big chunky bell pepper. And the others are the Corno di Toro type, so the long thin pointy peppers. I do have 3 other varieties of sweet pepper, all Italian varieties, and they're going to go in our smaller greenhouse along with the chillies. They all have slightly smaller fruit, so they're the better choice to keep in the smaller greenhouse, and they'll be put into pots. These are being spaced out, well, exactly 54 centimeters apart. That's just how it worked out, but roughly ½ meter apart is plenty of space for these, because I'm not going to allow these to get bushy. So I haven't pinched the tips out. I've allowed them to develop naturally, and at the height these are at now, these are starting to split. So this particular one has divided into 3 stems, and that's probably pretty common. Some of these I think have divided into 2, but it's very often the case that it will split into 3. Much like the aubergines, I'm not going to let these continue to divide. I will take either 1 or 2 of these stems, and probably 2. I will either put some canes or some strings down from the mesh that we've got fixed to the roof of the greenhouse, and I can tie these into those. So I will just keep those 2 stems, and I will keep all the side shoots pinched out, and that's why we can have these, well, fairly close together. I mean, ½ meter I think is a pretty good spacing if you're only training 1 or 2 of these stems, so I think they should be fine. But we've got yellow in this greenhouse and then red in the other. So I'm not planting these deep. These are going in just as they are in the pots. But I am taking note of the position of the shoots up the top to put 2 of them in this plane. I can then take that 3rd one out later on. Oh, there's something unpleasant down here. So this one's only split into two, so that's perfect. Just line that one up. Well, this job is taking a little bit longer than I thought, so I'm going to leave it there for part one, and in the next video I will return to deal with the remaining sweet peppers and chilies. They're all going to be put in pots in one of the other greenhouses. So that is all for this video, so thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.